When Isaiah Boone was arrested outside a corner store, the police saw what they wanted to see. Just another homeless black man to lock away. They never questioned why his military records had vanished, or why a man who slept behind a church could recite classified mission protocols with perfect clarity. As public defender Nina Clay dug deeper, she uncovered a buried truth. Before Isaiah became invisible to society, he had been deliberately erased by it. Now, facing trumped-up charges in a courtroom where justice rarely visits the forgotten, no one expected the moment when a judge would stand and command an entire room to rise for the man they'd all been trained to ignore. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. And if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow's special episode is one you definitely don't want to miss. The early morning sun cast long shadows across the weathered streets of downtown. Isaiah Boone moved silently between alleys, his eyes downcast, his weathered hands clutching a half-filled bag of aluminum cans. At 62, his face was a roadmap of struggles and secrets, carved with lines that spoke of burdens too heavy for most to understand. "Here you go, Sergeant," Isaiah muttered, placing a half-eaten sandwich near an alleyway dumpster. A spotted mutt with one torn ear crept forward, sniffing the offering before gently taking it. Isaiah watched the dog eat, a ghost of a smile softening his otherwise stern expression. It was the closest thing to conversation he'd had in days. The dog finished eating and nudged Isaiah's hand with its nose. He patted its head twice before straightening up. "Same time tomorrow," he promised, adjusting the frayed straps of his backpack. The weight of his few possessions hung from shoulders that once carried much more. Isaiah continued his methodical route through the city. To passers-by, he was invisible, just another homeless man, another problem they could pretend not to see. He preferred it that way. Invisibility meant safety. It meant no questions about the nightmares that still jolted him awake at 3 in the morning, drenched in sweat and reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. By mid-afternoon, Isaiah had collected enough cans to maybe afford a bottle of water and a protein bar. He made his way to Mason's Corner Store, a small shop he frequented because the back entrance led directly to St. Augustine's Church, where he slept in the sheltered alcove behind the dumpsters. The church groundskeeper knew he was there but never chased him away, a small mercy Isaiah never took for granted. Inside the store, Tom Brady, a young white man with thinning hair and a permanent scowl, stood behind the counter. His face was flushed with anger as he barked into his cell phone. "I don't care what they told you. I said I'd have the money by the 15th and it's only the 10th. Tom's voice cracked with frustration. "Just give me until Friday, man. I swear I'll—" He paused, listening to the voice on the other end. "Fine. Whatever. I'll figure something out." Tom slammed the phone down just as Isaiah approached the counter, placing a dollar bill and 37 cents beside the register. "Water," Isaiah said simply, his voice gravelly from disuse. Tom stared at the money, then at Isaiah. The daze, frustration seemed to crystallize in that moment, focusing on the weathered black man standing before him. "What, you think this is a charity?" Tom sneered, pushing the coins back across the counter. Isaiah didn't move. "It's enough," he said quietly. "Same price as yesterday." "Well, today's different," Tom said, standing taller. "Price went up. Now, get out before you scare off my real customers." Isaiah reached for his money. "I'll go somewhere else." Tom's hand shot out, grabbing Isaiah's wrist. "You think you can waste my time? Come in here stinking up my store?" His voice rose with each word, drawing the attention of the only other customer in the aisle. "Let go," Isaiah said, his tone flat but his eyes suddenly alert, focused. There was something in that gaze that might have warned a more observant man, something that spoke of training and intensity beneath the weary exterior. Tom didn't notice. Instead, he shoved Isaiah hard, sending him stumbling backward into a display of chips. "Get out, you worthless!" He spat a racial slur that hung in the air like poison. Isaiah regained his balance with unexpected grace. He didn't advance or retreat. He simply stood, his posture shifting subtly into something more controlled, more deliberate. Tom reached for his phone. "I'm calling the cops. This guy just tried to assault me," he shouted, though Isaiah hadn't moved an inch toward him. "He threatened me, said he'd come back and burn this place down." 10 minutes later, a police cruiser screeched to a halt outside the store. Officers Peter Griggs, Mike Malloy, and James Turner stepped out, adjusting their belts with practiced synchronization. Griggs, the oldest of the three and wearing sergeant's stripes, took the lead. Isaiah had moved outside, sitting quietly on a bench while he waited for the situation to dissolve. He knew better than to leave. Running made you guilty in their eyes no matter what. "That him?" Griggs asked Tom, who had come out to meet them. "Yeah, that's him." Tom nodded vigorously. "Went crazy when I told him he couldn't get water without paying the full price. Started threatening me, tried to come behind the counter." Isaiah stood slowly, hands visible at his sides. "I didn't—" "Shut up," Griggs barked, closing the distance between them. "Hands where I can see them." "They are," Isaiah replied calmly. Something about Isaiah's composure seemed to enrage Griggs. Without warning, he lunged forward, tackling Isaiah to the ground. Isaiah's head connected with the concrete sidewalk with a sickening crack. Blood began to pool beneath him. "Stop resisting," Griggs shouted, though Isaiah's body had gone limp beneath him. A young woman across the street raised her phone, recording the scene. "He's not doing anything," she called out. "He's just sitting there." Officer Turner strode over, grabbing her wrist and twisting until she dropped the phone. He crushed it beneath his boot. "Evidence in an ongoing investigation," he said flatly. "Interference is a criminal offense." Another bystander began filming from his car. Officer Malloy approached, hand on his holstered weapon. "Move along, sir. Police business." "Public sidewalk," the man replied. "I have a right—" "You have the right to be arrested for obstruction," Malloy cut in. "Your choice." The man hesitated, then reluctantly drove away. Isaiah was silent as Griggs roughly cuffed his hands behind his back. Blood trickled down his temple, but his eyes remained clear, focused on some middle distance as if this moment existed separately from his actual consciousness. "Get him in the car," Griggs ordered. Malloy and Turner hoisted Isaiah to his feet and dragged him to the cruiser, his legs barely supporting his weight. They shoved him into the back seat, his head hitting the doorframe as they forced him inside. As they drove toward the precinct, Isaiah's lips moved slightly, mumbling words too quiet to hear. "What's that, General Garbage?" Griggs called back, mockingly. "Giving orders to your imaginary troops?" Isaiah fell silent again. "This one's gonna stick," Griggs said to his partners. "Just like all the rest of them, no one's gonna miss another piece of street trash." At the station, Isaiah was processed efficiently, photographed, fingerprinted, and placed in a holding cell. While Turner completed the paperwork, Malloy and Griggs took Isaiah's ragged backpack into an empty interview room. "Let's make sure this sticks," Griggs said, pulling a switchblade from his pocket and wiping it clean before dropping it into Isaiah's bag. Malloy added a small bottle of unlabeled pills. "Found these concealed in the suspect's possession," Griggs dictated, as Malloy wrote on the evidence form. Suspect became belligerent and threatened officers and civilians. Turner completed his incident report, carefully transcribing the fabricated narrative of violent resistance and threats. He added the clerk's statement, embellished with details about Isaiah's supposed aggression. In another part of the city, Nina Clay stepped out of the courthouse, her shoulders tense from a day of fighting battles she was usually destined to lose. At 27, she was already developing the 1,000-yard stare common to public defenders, young idealists who quickly learned that justice and law were often distant cousins. "Clay," a voice called out. William Barker, her gray-haired mentor, jogged to catch up with her. "Heading out already? It's only 7. Nina smiled tiredly. "Only 12 hours today instead of 14. I'm slacking." Barker's expression softened. "Listen, just get through this week. We've got that grant coming in. Might be able to hire another Audie." "And in the meantime?" Nina asked. "In the meantime," Barker sighed, "we do what we can. Speaking of which," he handed her a file. "New intake. Nobody else wanted it." Nina flipped open the folder, scanning the details. Isaiah Boone. Assault, resisting arrest, concealed weapon, possession. Griggs was the arresting officer. She looked up sharply. Again? Barker nodded. Fourth case this month with his name on it. All homeless, all with similar charges. And all guilty, according to Judge Williams, Nina said bitterly. Just tread carefully. Booking says he hasn't said a word since they brought him in. The following morning, Nina sat across from Isaiah in a dingy interview room at the county jail. Isaiah was perfectly still, his hands folded on the table, his eyes focused on the wall behind her. The gash on his forehead had been crudely bandaged. Mr. Boone, I'm Nina Clay from the Public Defender's Office. I've been assigned to your case. She waited for a response, but Isaiah remained motionless. Can you tell me what happened yesterday? Isaiah's face betrayed nothing. No anger, no fear, no hope. Just a practiced emptiness that Nina had seen before in clients who'd given up on the system long ago. Mr. Boone, I'm trying to help you, but I need you to work with me. Nina leaned forward. The report says you threatened the store clerk and resisted arrest. They claim they found a knife and drugs in your possession. Isaiah's eyes finally shifted, meeting hers directly. Something in his gaze unsettled her. A clarity and intensity that seemed at odds with his circumstances. Sergeant Boone, he said, softly but distinctly. First Recon, Special Joint Task Command. That's all I'll say. Nina blinked, surprised to hear him speak. You served in the military? Isaiah's expression closed again, his focus returning to the wall. Nina tried several more questions, but Isaiah had retreated back into silence. Frustrated but intrigued, she gathered her notes and stood to leave. I'll be back tomorrow, Mr. Boone. Please think about what information might help your case. As Nina walked down the corridor toward the exit, she noticed Officer Griggs leaning against the wall, watching her with undisguised contempt. Another fresh girl trying to save trash, he said loudly to another officer. Won't last a month. Nina ignored him, pressing forward with her head high. Once in her car, she pulled out her phone and searched Joint Task Command. Most results were redacted or classified, but one declassified military reference mentioned a specialized unit operating in multiple combat zones between 2001 and 2010. Everything else was blacked out. She stared at the phone, more questions forming, then answers. Who was Isaiah Boone really? And why did Officer Griggs seem so determined to put him away? Nina sat at her cluttered desk, surrounded by stacks of case files competing for attention, but her focus remained on Isaiah Boone. 3 days had passed since their first meeting, and she couldn't shake the feeling that something about his case didn't add up. She typed his name into multiple databases, criminal records, public records, even social media, finding almost nothing. The only hit was a 20-year-old mugshot from a trespassing charge that was eventually dismissed. After that, Isaiah Boone might as well have been a ghost. It doesn't make sense, she muttered, rubbing her tired eyes. Everyone left digital. Footprints these days, bills, taxes, credit checks. How does someone simply vanish from the system? Her phone buzzed with a text from her court clerk contact. Police report finally came through. Sending now. Nina skimmed the newly arrived document, noting inconsistencies immediately. The physical description mentioned Isaiah as approximately 40 years old, when the booking information clearly listed him as 62. The report claimed he'd threatened officers with violence, yet there was no body camera footage attached, unusual, for a confrontational arrest. At Malone's bar across town, Officers Griggs, Malloy, and Turner occupied their usual corner booth, 3 beers in and growing louder by the minute. You should have seen this guy, Griggs laughed, slapping the table. All high and mighty until I put him down. Another one who thinks he's special. The look on his face when you planted him, Turner snickered. Like he couldn't believe it was happening. Best part is, he barely said a word, Malloy added. Makes it easy when they know it's hopeless. Unlike that junkie last month, Griggs grimaced, screaming his head off about his rights. Rights, Turner scoffed, like the trash deserves rights. The bartender, Sam Wilson, kept his eyes down as he wiped glasses nearby, trying to appear busy while straining to hear their conversation. We better clean house before the feds get nosy again, Griggs said, his voice dropping slightly. That internal review last year was too close. Relax, Turner replied. Williams will sign off on whatever we give him. Judge owes me after what I did for his son. Sam moved away, uncomfortable with what he was hearing but unwilling to risk his job, or worse, by speaking up. The next morning, Nina drove to Mason's corner store, hoping to interview the clerk who'd reported Isaiah. As she entered, Tom Brady looked up from the register, his expression hardening when she introduced herself. I already gave my statement to the police, he said defensively. That bum threatened me. End of story. Mr. Brady, there are inconsistencies in the report, Nina pressed. Witnesses say Mr. Boone was sitting quietly outside when police arrived. Tom's face flushed. Those people didn't see what happened inside. He wiped sweat from his forehead despite the store's aggressive air conditioning. Look, I don't have to talk to you. You should leave before I call the cops again. Were you pressured to give that statement? Nina asked directly. Because false reporting is a crime, Mr. Brady. Get out, Tom shouted, reaching for the phone. Get out now. Nina left, more convinced than ever that something was being covered up. The clerk's nervousness seemed disproportionate to a simple assault complaint. At the county jail, Isaiah sat motionless on his thin mattress, his back straight against the wall. His eyes tracked the movement of officers in the corridor, but his expression revealed nothing. Officer Miller Jenkins walked past, deliberately tipping the food tray he was carrying. The watery stew splashed across Isaiah's chest and lap. Oops, Jenkins sneered. Looks like you failed the training exercise, soldier boy. Isaiah made no move to clean himself, his stillness unnerving the younger officer. Another correctional, Officer James Bell, approached with a towel. Clean yourself up, he said loudly for the benefit of his colleagues. But as he handed Isaiah the towel, he whispered, Don't let them break you. Isaiah's eyes flickered briefly to Bell's face, a momentary connection before his mask of indifference returned. After leaving the jail, Nina called Ryan Foster, a former Army medic she'd defended 2 years earlier on a minor drug charge. They met at a coffee shop away from the courthouse district. I appreciate you meeting me, Nina said, sliding a photo of Isaiah across the table. Do you recognize this man or his unit? Ryan studied the booking photo, then the close-up Nina had taken of a faded tattoo visible on Isaiah's wrist. Holy shit, he whispered, pushing the photos back. Where did you find this guy? He's my client. Why? This isn't some regular Army ink, Ryan explained, pointing to the tattoo. This design, the crossed arrows with the star, that's from a disavowed elite unit. These guys did the kind of ops that don't exist on paper. What kind of ops? Nina pressed. Ryan shook his head. The kind that get written out of history when they go wrong, or right in the wrong way, if you know what I mean. He leaned closer. Whatever he's involved in, you're poking a very old bear, Nina. The kind with friends in Washington. As Ryan spoke, Nina's mind flashed to an image. A young Isaiah in full tactical gear, face partially obscured by camo paint, moving through a bullet-riddled building. Terrified hostages huddled against a wall as Isaiah and his team cleared the space, professional and precise. Outside, gunfire and explosions punctuated the chaos of a war zone. Isaiah's commander shouted over the radio, Boone! Extraction in 5, we're leaving the civilians. Isaiah's response was immediate and firm. Negative, they're walking out with us. That's a direct order, Sergeant. The area's too hot. Isaiah looked at the frightened families, women clutching, children, an elderly man struggling to stand. Then we make it cooler, sir. No one gets left behind. Back in the present, Nina filed a formal request for access to Isaiah's military record. The response came faster than expected. A terse email stating that no such records existed under that name and rank combination. That evening, Nina checked her voicemail to find a message from an unlisted number. Public defenders who dig too deep tend to find themselves buried. The homeless guy isn't worth your career. Or worse. She played it twice, her hand trembling slightly. She'd received threats before. Many defendants' families blamed their lawyers when cases went south. But this felt different, more calculated, more dangerous. The following day, Nina was reviewing Isaiah's file outside the courthouse when a tall black man approached, coffee in hand. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, his press badge catching the light. Elijah Cross, Bay City Tribune. "I don't talk to reporters about cases," Nina replied automatically. "I'm not here about a specific case," Elijah said, sitting down anyway. "I'm here about a pattern." He slid a folder across the bench. 6 homeless veterans arrested in the last year, all by the same officers, all with similar charges, all represented by overworked public defenders, all convicted. Nina opened the folder cautiously. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because you're the first PD who's filed multiple procedural challenges on one of these cases," Elijah answered. "The others just plea bargained to make the cases go away." "And why do you care about homeless veterans?" Nina asked. "Because 3 of them disappeared from the system after sentencing," Elijah said grimly. "No record of them in any state facility. I think someone's cleaning house." Nina thought of Griggs' words at the bar. "We better clean house before the feds get nosy again." Elijah continued, "I've been tracking a disturbing pattern of disappearances and false charges targeting homeless veterans in particular. It's not random harassment. It's systematic." Nina hesitated, weighing her professional caution against her growing suspicions. "I need to think about this," she finally said. "Fair enough," Elijah handed her his card. "But think quickly. Your client's preliminary hearing is in 2 days." Later that afternoon, Nina requested a meeting with Judge Franklin Williams, who would A. be presiding over Isaiah's case. After an hour's wait, she was admitted to his chambers. "Make it quick, Ms. Clay," Williams said without looking up from his papers. "I have a full docket." "Your Honor, I have concerns about evidence tampering in the Boone case. Officer Griggs has a history of—" "Griggs is a decorated officer," Williams interrupted. "These are serious allegations, Counselor. I've filed a motion to suppress the knife and pills. There's reason to believe they were planted." Williams finally looked up, his expression cold. "Based on what?" "The word of a homeless man against 3 officers. Be careful making accusations you can't substantiate." Nina noticed a framed photo on the judge's desk. Williams shaking hands with Police Chief Robert Andrews at what appeared to be a charity golf tournament. The casual familiarity between them was evident even in the still image. "I'm not making accusations, Your Honor. I'm requesting a fair examination of all evidence." "Request noted," Williams said dismissively. "Anything else?" Nina left the judge's chambers with a growing sense of dread. The system that was supposed to protect Isaiah seemed determined to bury him instead. That evening, Elijah texted Nina. "Found something. Meet me tomorrow, same spot, 7 a.m. When Nina arrived the next morning, Elijah was already waiting, a yellowed newspaper clipping protected in a plastic sleeve. "This took some digging," he said, handing it to her. "Foreign correspondence photo from a classified operation in 2007. Look at the background, behind the general." Nina examined the faded image. A 4-star general stood in the foreground, but behind him, partially obscured but unmistakable, was Isaiah Boone, younger, sharper, wearing the uniform of an elite unit. No name or caption identified him. Why would a decorated soldier end up homeless and erased from official records? Nina wondered aloud. "That's the question," Elijah agreed. "And someone's going to great lengths to make sure it never gets answered. In court." Nina studied the photo again, a chill running through her. "This case is bigger than anything I've handled before, isn't it?" Elijah nodded grimly. "Much bigger, and much more dangerous." The newspaper clipping weighed heavily in Nina's hand as she made her way through the jail's security checkpoints. The image of a younger Isaiah standing behind a 4-star general had shifted something within her, transforming a case into a mission. She found Isaiah sitting in the same position as before, back straight against the wall, eyes forward, like a soldier at attention even in rest. "I found something," Nina said without preamble, placing the photo on the table between them. "This is you, isn't it?" Isaiah's eyes flickered to the image, then back to the middle distance. But Nina had caught it. The brief flash of recognition, the slight tightening around his mouth. "Isaiah," she said softly, using his first name for The first time. I need you to help me understand what happened, not just at the store but before, all of it. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant sound of a guard's radio crackling. Then, almost imperceptibly, Isaiah shifted his posture. You're not just here for the case anymore, are you? His voice was low, rusty from disuse, but clearer than before. No, Nina admitted. I'm here because someone is going to great lengths to bury you in the system. I want to know why. Isaiah studied her face, his eyes sharp with an intelligence that belied his homeless appearance. He seemed to reach some internal decision. I was a sniper first, he began, each word measured and precise. Deployed to Afghanistan in 2002, best in my unit for long-range elimination of high-value targets. Nina listened, barely breathing, as Isaiah continued. After 3 tours, they moved me to command positions. Field operations, the kind that officially never happened. His weathered hands lay flat on the table, steady and controlled. I led a special unit attached to Joint Task Command. We handled extractions, intelligence gathering, and occasionally, cleanup. Cleanup? Nina asked. A shadow crossed Isaiah's face. When powerful people made mistakes, we made them disappear. He paused. Until I couldn't anymore. Isaiah described an operation in 2008, a mission gone catastrophically wrong. His team had been ordered to eliminate evidence of civilian massacres carried out by private military contractors with government connections. They wanted us to burn it all, Isaiah said, his voice hardening. The files, the photos, the bodies, said it was for national security. He met Nina's eyes directly. But those people had families searching for them. Children who deserved to know what happened to their parents. You disobeyed the order, Nina guessed. Isaiah nodded once. I sent copies of everything to a secure drop. Insurance. His expression darkened. 3 days later, I was stripped of my rank, labeled a security threat, and dishonorably discharged. My entire record was classified, then erased. Nina scribbled notes rapidly. And after you came home? Pain flashed across Isaiah's face, a brief crack in his stoic facade. I had a wife, Alicia, and a daughter, Aaliyah, 8 years old when I left for my last tour. His voice softened at their names. Alicia wrote to me every week I was gone, said she'd wait no matter what. He fell silent for a moment, gathering himself. 2 months after I got back, Alicia died in a car accident. Brake lines cut, but the police report said driver error. The bitterness in his voice was palpable. Convenient timing. And your daughter? Nina asked gently. Child Services took her, said I was mentally unstable, a danger. His hands curled into fists. By then I was having nightmares, flashbacks, started drinking to quiet the noise in my head. He gestured vaguely around him. One bad night led to another, and eventually, the streets felt safer than trying to be part of a world that didn't want me. Nina's heart raced as connections formed in her mind. The officers who arrested you, could they be connected to your past? Isaiah shook his head. Don't think so. Just regular corrupt cops who found an easy target. His eyes narrowed. But someone might be using them. The timing is interesting. How so? Last month was the 15th anniversary of that mission, and 3 weeks ago one of my old teammates was found dead in his apartment. Natural causes, they said. Isaiah's tone made it clear what he thought of that assessment. When Nina left the jail, her mind was reeling with implications. If Isaiah's story was true, and her instincts told her it was, then this case had dangerous tendrils reaching far beyond a simple arrest. The next day, Nina slipped into the police records office under the pretense of researching another case. While the clerk stepped away to retrieve a file, she quickly accessed Officer Griggs' arrest records for the past year. The pattern was unmistakable. Of Griggs' last 36 arrests, 23 involved homeless individuals. 8 were veterans. 5 had been charged with almost identical offenses to Isaiah's. All had quickly pled guilty under pressure, except one who died in custody before trial, supposedly from a pre-existing heart condition. Nina photographed the relevant pages with her phone, her hands shaking slightly. The systematic targeting was too consistent to be coincidental. Following a lead from Elijah, Nina drove to Pinewood Veterans Care Home on the outskirts of the city. The facility was clean but understaffed, with an air of resigned dignity about it. In the sunroom at the end of the East Wing, a man in a wheelchair gazed out at the gardens. "Mr. Rivera," Nina approached cautiously. "I'm Nina Clay." Calvin Rivera turned his wheelchair with practiced ease. At 55, his face retained the handsome features of his youth, though a jagged scar ran from his left temple to his jawline. His lower body was immobile, covered with a neatly arranged blanket despite the warm day. "The lawyer," he said, his voice surprisingly strong. "You're younger than I expected." "Thank you for agreeing to see me," Nina said, taking the seat he indicated. "I'm representing Isaiah Boone." Cal's expression shifted, a complex mixture of emotions crossing his face. Never thought I'd hear that name again. He wheeled himself. Closer. "How is he?" "In trouble," Nina replied honestly. "And I think it's connected to what happened to your unit." Cal was silent for a long moment, his eyes calculating. "What exactly did Isaiah tell you?" "About Operation Nightwind. About the evidence he preserved. About his discharge." Cal's hands tightened on his wheelchair arms. "Isaiah Boone was the most honorable man I ever served with," he said finally. "The kind who'd rather die than break his word. We all paid for what happened, but Isaiah paid the most." "His file wasn't just sealed, was it?" Nina pressed. "No," Cal confirmed. "It was erased, as if he never existed." He leaned forward. "Do you understand what that means? Someone with enough power to delete a decorated soldier from history still considers him a threat." Nina left Pinewood with more questions than answers, but one certainty. Isaiah Boone was a man who had stood against corruption at the highest levels and was still paying the price. That evening, Nina attempted to access the military archive, site again, searching for any trace of Isaiah's unit. Her screen suddenly went blank, then displayed a simple error message. "Access denied." Seconds later, a firm knock sounded at her apartment door. Nina hesitated, then looked through the peephole. A man in a dark suit stood outside, his posture rigid and professional. Not police. Something else. Heart pounding, she opened the door. "A few inches. Security chain still in place. Ms. Clay?" The man's voice was neutral, his expression unreadable. "A message for you." He extended an envelope through the gap. Nina took it cautiously. "From whom?" But the man was already walking away. "Have a good evening, counselor." Inside the envelope was a single sheet of paper with one word printed in the center: "Careful." Meanwhile, at the county jail, Officer Bell moved quietly through his evening rounds. As he passed the break room, he overheard Griggs and Malloy laughing. "Clay's nosing around the records office," Griggs was saying. "Just like the last two defenders who tried getting cute." "She'll back off," Malloy replied confidently. "They always do when things get personal." Bell continued walking, his face carefully blank, but his mind racing. He'd been watching these officers for months, documenting their abuses when he could without being detected. Isaiah Boone's case might finally be the one that exposed them, if Bell could find the courage to act. Late that night, in a dreamlike haze, Isaiah found himself back in the sweltering heat of a distant desert. He and 4 other soldiers moved, silently through an abandoned compound, gathering documents from a hidden office. The air smelled of dust and cordite. "Hurry up," Lieutenant Wilson urged, keeping watch at the door. "We've got 10 minutes before the airstrike." Isaiah and the others worked methodically, sorting through papers and computer files, separating intelligence from disinformation. "Sir," Isaiah called softly, holding up a folder labeled Operation Nightwind. Inside were records of weapons, shipments diverted from military supply lines to black market dealers, with signatures from American officials. Wilson stared at the documents, then at Isaiah. "Burn it," he ordered. "All of it." Isaiah hesitated, seeing the names of people who should never have been involved in such transactions. "Sir, this is evidence of—" "That's an order, Sergeant," Wilson cut him off. This operation never happened. As flames consumed the documents, Isaiah slipped a thumb drive into his pocket, a backup he'd made while his team was distracted. A decision that would eventually cost him everything. Miles away, in a modest apartment across town, 24-year-old Aaliyah Boone sat cross-legged on her bed, surrounded by old photographs and letters. Her mother's diary lay open beside her, its pages yellowed with age. "Who were you, really?" she whispered, tracing her finger over a faded photo of a tall black man in military uniform, his face serious but kind. Her father, a stranger she barely remembered. She flipped through the diary again, stopping at an entry dated 2 weeks before her mother's accident. "I think we're being watched. The same car has been parked across the street for 3 days. I told Isaiah he's being paranoid, but now I'm not so sure. What did he really bring back from over there?" Aaliyah gathered the photos and diary pages, her hands trembling slightly. Something had happened to her family. Something more than the official story of a troubled veteran who couldn't adjust to civilian life. She opened her laptop and began to type, uploading the images to a private forum. Looking for information on this soldier, possibly connected to classified operations 2005-2008. He's my father, and I need to know what happened to him. The morning of Isaiah's preliminary hearing arrived with an unexpected development. Nina arrived at the courthouse early to find Ben Williams, the assistant district attorney, waiting for her with a smug smile. "We're amending the charges," he announced, handing her a document. "Added an anonymous witness statement describing how your client threatened multiple people in the park before the store incident." Nina scanned the paper, her suspicion growing. "Convenient timing," she noted, examining the witness signature. The handwriting seemed oddly familiar. After Williams left, Nina pulled out other documents from the case file, comparing the signatures. The alleged witness's signature had the same peculiar loop on the letter Y as Officer Malloy's handwriting on the arrest report. "Gotcha," she whispered, photographing the evidence with her phone. In the courtroom, Nina presented her findings to Judge Williams, methodically laying out the similarities between the signatures and requesting the anonymous statement be thrown out as fraudulent evidence. The judge frowned, clearly displeased at being put on the spot. After a tense moment, he grudgingly granted Nina's motion. "The anonymous witness statement is stricken from the record," he declared, avoiding Griggs's glare from the gallery. It was a small victory, but Nina could feel the momentum shifting. That afternoon, Nina and Elijah returned to Pinewood Care Home to speak with Cal Rivera again. This time Cal seemed ready for them, with a shoebox of old photographs on his lap. "I've been thinking about what you asked," he said, gesturing for them to sit. "About Isaiah's past." He removed a faded photograph of 6 soldiers standing in front of a helicopter, arms around each other's shoulders. "This was our unit, the best of the best." Nina recognized Isaiah immediately, younger, stronger, but with the same watchful eyes. Isaiah was supposed to receive the Medal of Valor, Cal continued, his voice tinged with old anger, for saving 18 hostages and 4 team members during an extraction gone bad. The ceremony was scheduled, then canceled without explanation. "When was this?" Elijah asked, taking notes. 2 weeks before they discharged him, Cal replied. Someone made a call and suddenly 15 years of exemplary service meant nothing. As they were leaving, Cal gripped Nina's wrist with surprising strength. "There's something else you should know," he said quietly. 3 of the men in that photo are dead. Accidents. Isaiah and I are the only ones left. The implications hung in the air between them, unspoken but understood. Back at the county jail, Officer Bell found himself at a crossroads. For months, he'd witnessed Griggs and his partners abuse their authority, particularly with homeless and mentally ill inmates. But speaking out in a department that protected its own was a quick path to career suicide, or worse. That night, Bell stayed late, waiting until the booking area was deserted. Using his access card, he entered the evidence room and located the body camera footage from Isaiah's arrest. He copied the files onto a USB drive, then carefully returned everything to its original state. The next evening, Bell slipped into the jail's small chapel, a converted storage room rarely used except by the visiting chaplain. He knelt beside the worn pulpit and carefully extracted the leather-bound Bible from its stand. Opening it to the book of Isaiah, he placed the USB drive inside and returned the Bible to its place. "Forgive me," he whispered, unsure if he was apologizing for his years of silence or for the risk he was now taking. Meanwhile, Aaliyah's online post had begun gaining traction. Veterans groups and military forums picked up her quest, sharing her father's photo and asking for information. Former service members recognized the unit insignia, even if they didn't know Isaiah personally. That's Joint Task Command insignia. Those guys were ghosts. Did Black Ops even Congress didn't know about? I served with a guy who knew someone from that unit. Said they were sent on suicide missions regularly and somehow kept coming back. Check the dates, right when all those classified operations were being run out of forward bases in redacted. Nasty business. Aaliyah gathered every scrap of information, building a picture of her father's service that official channels had tried to erase. Nina's investigation took her to a storage facility on the outskirts of town. Using information from Isaiah's sparse personal effects, she located a small locker registered under the alias Samuel Rivers, a cover name Isaiah had mentioned using during covert operations. The facility manager was skeptical until Nina produced the key Isaiah had directed her to, hidden in the lining of his backpack. "That unit's been paid up for 15 years, the manager noted. Automatic payments from some trust account. Inside the climate-controlled locker, Nina found a leather-bound journal, a rusted dog tag, and several sealed waterproof containers holding photographs and documents from Isaiah's operations. Some showed Isaiah with high-ranking military officials, including elite U.S. generals whose faces Nina recognized from news coverage. She handled each item with reverence, understanding that she was holding pieces of a deliberately erased history, and, potentially, the key to Isaiah's freedom. That evening, Nina met with William Barker, her mentor and former judge, at his home outside the city. She trusted few people with the details of Isaiah's case, but Barker's 4 decades of legal experience made him invaluable. "The current judge, Williams, is compromised," Barker told her after reviewing her evidence. "His son was arrested last year on felony drug charges that mysteriously disappeared. Let me guess, Griggs was the arresting officer," Nina said. Barker nodded grimly. "The cops have something on Williams, and they're using it to control him. So he'll never rule fairly on Isaiah's case," Nina concluded. "Not unless you give him." "No choice," Barker replied. "You need evidence so compelling, so public, that burying it would be more dangerous than acknowledging it." At the Bay City Tribune, Elijah faced his own battle. His draft article exposing the police department's systematic targeting of homeless veterans was ready for publication, but his editor's response was immediate and final. "We can't run this," Mark Stevens declared, sliding the draft back across his desk. "Not enough corroboration, and the legal exposure would sink us." "I have documents, photos, arrest records showing the pattern," Elijah protested, "and accusations against the police chief's golden boys," Stevens cut in. "The same police chief who plays golf with the mayor, the same mayor who's friends with our publisher." He lowered his voice. "Look, I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm saying this isn't the hill to die on." Elijah left the office, frustration burning in his chest. But instead of abandoning the story, he returned to his apartment and spent the night, reformatting it for a different audience. By morning, his exposé was uploaded to Truthline, a respected whistleblower site known for vetting its submissions rigorously. Within hours, the article began circulating among advocacy groups, legal forums, and social media accounts focused on veterans' issues and police accountability. Back in her office, Nina pored over Isaiah's journal, its pages filled with neat, precise handwriting, documenting missions, coordinates, and observations. The final entries detailed a specific arms deal that went catastrophically wrong. American weapons meant for Allied forces diverted to regional warlords instead. Isaiah had named names, including highly placed officials who coordinated the diversion. One of those officials, Nina noted with a chill, now held a senior position in Washington. "This is why they erased him," she whispered to herself. "He knew too much." As Nina worked late into the night, cross-referencing Isaiah's journal with public records and news reports from the period, her phone buzzed with a message from Elijah. "Need to meet now." Found your client's daughter. Nina stared at the text, her heart racing. Aaliyah, she whispered. Across town, Officer Bell sat in his car outside the jail, hands shaking as he contemplated his next move. The USB with the body cam footage felt like a live grenade in his pocket. If he was caught leaking evidence, his career would be over, and that might be the least of his worries. His phone lit up with a text from his brother, Miguel. Just got my interview at the tech company. Thanks for helping with my application. Man, Bell smiled despite his anxiety. Miguel had come to the country 5 years ago, and while his status was being processed, he remained vulnerable. Griggs knew about Miguel's situation and had subtly threatened to make a call to immigration if Bell ever stepped out of line. But some lines had to be crossed. Bell started his car, his decision made. The following morning, Nina watched as a young, black woman entered the small coffee shop, her movements deliberate and poised. Aaliyah Boone had her father's watchful eyes and her mother's delicate features, a perfect blend of the parents she had lost too soon. Ms. Clay? She approached, the table where Nina and Elijah waited. You said you're representing my father. Please sit down. Nina gestured to the empty chair. Yes, I'm Isaiah's attorney. This is Elijah Cross, a journalist who's been helping with the case. Aaliyah sat, her back straight, hands clasped on the table. I've been looking for my father. For years, she said quietly. The system told me he abandoned me, that he was dangerous, unstable. That's not true, Nina said firmly. Your father was silenced because of what he knew, what he tried to expose. He never stopped loving you. Aaliyah's composure cracked slightly. I have his eyes, she said, almost to herself. That's what my foster mother used to say. Nina slid a recent photo of Isaiah across the table. He needs your help now. Aaliyah stared at the image, tracing her father's weathered face with her fingertip. Tell me everything, she said, her voice strengthening with resolve. As Nina explained the case from the false arrest to the deeper conspiracy surrounding Isaiah's military past, Aaliyah's expression shifted from shock to determination. I'm a law student, she revealed. Second year at State. I can help with research, testimonials, anything. There's something else, Elijah added. Your mother's accident. We have reason to believe it wasn't an accident at all. Aaliyah nodded slowly. I found her diary last month. She suspected they were being watched just before she died. The meeting lasted for hours, 3 strangers united by a common cause, to free Isaiah Boone and expose the corruption that had destroyed his life. Later that day, Officer Bell approached Nina as she left the courthouse. His uniform was disheveled, his eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep. I need to talk to you, he said urgently, glancing over his shoulder. Not here. They walked silently to a nearby park, Bell constantly checking to ensure they weren't followed. When they reached a secluded bench, he pulled a USB drive from his pocket. Body cam footage, he explained, his voice barely above a whisper, from Isaiah's arrest. Griggs didn't know my camera was still running. Nina took the drive, understanding the risk Bell had taken. This could change everything. Bell nodded, his hands shaking as he wiped tears from his eyes. I watched them. Plant that knife, that bottle. I heard Griggs say. He swallowed hard. He said, the old man saw too much. Let's bury him like the rest. Nina slipped the drive into her pocket. Thank you. I know what this cost you. Just make it count. Bell replied, already walking away. Make it right. That evening, Nina, Elijah, and Aaliyah gathered in Nina's office, reviewing the body cam footage on a secure computer. The video was damning. Clear evidence of Griggs planting evidence in Isaiah's backpack, along with explicit statements about making the charges stick. We've got them, Elijah breathed, watching the footage for a third time. This proves everything. Not everything, Nina cautioned. It proves this arrest was fraudulent, but not the larger conspiracy against Isaiah. It's a start, Aaliyah said firmly. A crack in their armor. She looked at the freeze frame of Griggs holding the planted switchblade. And once we start pulling on this thread, the whole thing unravels, Nina finished, a grim smile of determination forming on her lips. The morning sun filtered through the blinds of Nina's office as she placed the USB drive containing Officer Bell's body cam footage on her supervisor's desk. Howard Morgan, the chief public defender for the county, leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled beneath his chin. "You understand what you're asking me to do?" Morgan's voice was low, careful. "This isn't just another motion to suppress evidence. You're accusing decorated officers of conspiracy." "I'm not asking you to do anything except your job," Nina replied, sliding a folder across the desk. "The motion is already written. All it needs is your signature." Morgan flipped through the document, his frown deepening. "You're going to make a lot of powerful people very uncomfortable." "They should be uncomfortable," Nina said, standing her ground. "They've been framing homeless veterans and getting away with it." Morgan closed the folder without signing. "I need to think about this. We have to consider the broader implications for the office. The budget is up for review next month, and the DA's office has already—" "This isn't about politics," Nina interrupted. "Isaiah Boone is innocent. That should be our only consideration." "Nothing is ever that simple, and you know it." Morgan slid the folder back to her. "Give me 24 hours. And Nina—" His voice dropped to a whisper. "Watch your back. There are lines being crossed here that can't be uncrossed." As Nina left the building, she noticed a black sedan parked across the street, its windows tinted beyond legal limits. The driver's silhouette was visible but indistinct. She felt eyes tracking her as she walked to her car. At the county jail, Officer Bell completed his morning rounds with practiced efficiency, trying to maintain his normal routine despite the knot of anxiety in his stomach. As he passed the break room, Officer Griggs stepped out, blocking his path. "Bell," Griggs said, his tone deceptively casual. "Noticed you spending a lot of time near the chapel yesterday. Finding Jesus all of a sudden?" Bell kept his expression neutral. "Just checking the space. Chaplain reported some items missing." "Funny." Griggs leaned closer. "Security footage shows you there for nearly 10 minutes. Looking awful closely at that Bible." Bell's heart hammered in his chest, but he held Griggs's gaze. "I don't know what you're implying." "I'm not implying anything." Griggs smiled, the expression never reaching his eyes. "Just a friendly reminder. That's your brother, Miguel, right? His status is still processing. Be a shame if someone were to report irregularities in his application." Bell's hands clenched at his sides. "Are you threatening me?" "Threatening? No." Griggs patted Bell's shoulder, his grip painfully tight. "Just making sure we understand each other. Whatever you think you're doing, fix it, or I'll fix it for you." As Griggs walked away, Bell leaned against the wall, his breath coming in short gasps. He had known there would be consequences, but the reality of Griggs' threat against his brother was still terrifying. That afternoon, Nina and Aaliyah visited Isaiah at the jail. When Aaliyah entered the visiting room, the change in Isaiah was immediate and profound. His rigid posture softened, his eyes widening with recognition and disbelief. "Aaliyah?" His voice cracked on her name, barely above a whisper. She stood frozen, for a moment, taking in the face she had known only from faded photographs, now weathered by time and hardship. "Dad," she said simply, the word heavy with 16 years of absence. Isaiah reached across the table with trembling hands, stopping just short of touching her. "You look just like your mother," he whispered, tears welling in his eyes. Aaliyah closed the distance, grasping his hands in hers. "I've been looking for you." "I never stopped thinking about you," Isaiah said, his voice steadying. "Every day, every night. You were always with me." Nina stepped back, giving father and daughter a moment of privacy in the institutional space that allowed for none. The reunion was quiet, powerful, a small moment of healing in the midst of chaos. When they finally turned their attention to the case, Isaiah's determination had visibly strengthened. There was a new fire in his eyes, a reason to fight beyond mere survival. After the visit, Nina attempted to file a subpoena for Officer Bell to testify about the body cam footage. Judge Williams reluctantly signed the order, though his hand shook slightly as he did so. That night, Bell returned to his small apartment on the east side of the city. As he unlocked his door, the hairs on the back of his neck rose. Something was wrong. The air smelled different, disturbed. He reached for his off-duty weapon, but before he could draw it, a crushing blow struck the back of his head. He woke, briefly during the assault, catching glimpses of dark clothing, gloved hands, and the sickening crack of his own ribs breaking. As consciousness faded again, he heard a voice that sounded like Officer Malloy. "Next time it'll be your brother." Hours later, a nurse at Bay City General Hospital leaned over Bell's broken body. His face was almost unrecognizable beneath the swelling and bruises, tubes running from his nose and mouth. As she adjusted his IV, Bell's eyes flickered open, and his hand gripped her wrist with surprising strength. "Name's Nina Clay," he gasped through broken teeth, pressing a small flash drive into her palm. "Lawyer, find her. Give her this." The nurse glanced at the small device, then quickly pocketed it. "I'll find her," she promised. "Now rest." Meanwhile, Elijah's leaked article on Truthline had ignited a firestorm of public interest. The hashtags, Justice for Isaiah and Veterans Not Vagrants, began trending across social media platforms. Nina received calls from retired veterans across the country, offering support, resources, and testimonials about similar cases of police harassment. A group identifying themselves only as watchdogs contacted Elijah through encrypted channels, providing a redacted mission report from Operation Night Wind that had been scrubbed from official records. The document confirmed Isaiah's account. He had reported illegal activities by commanding officers and was systematically silenced. The growing public attention infuriated Officer Griggs. He stormed into District Attorney William Peterson's office, slamming the door behind him. "This needs to go away," Griggs demanded, throwing a printout of Elijah's article onto Peterson's desk. Now, Peterson, a man who had built his career on being tough on crime and friendly with law enforcement, straightened his tie nervously. "What exactly are you suggesting?" "Upgrade the charges," Griggs said. "Felony assault, attempted robbery. Make it stick." "On what grounds?" Peterson asked. "The evidence is—" "I don't care about the evidence," Griggs cut him off. "I care about results. Election's coming up, Peterson. You really want to be the DA who let cop killers walk?" Peterson bristled. "Boone hasn't killed anyone." "Not yet." Griggs leaned over the desk. "But imagine the headlines if he did. DA released dangerous criminal who later murdered officer. Your career would be over." After a moment's hesitation, Peterson nodded. "I'll file the amended charges. In the morning." Nina received notice of the escalated charges with grim resignation. It was a desperate move, but a dangerous one. She called Judge Williams's chambers, requesting an emergency meeting. The judge agreed to see her that evening after normal court hours. As Nina entered his chambers, she noticed immediately how tired he looked. The bags under his eyes, the slight tremor in his hands. "Make this quick, counselor," Williams said, not meeting her gaze. "Your Honor, I'm requesting you review new evidence in the Boone case." Nina placed a folder on his desk. "The body cam footage clearly shows—" "I can't help you," Williams interrupted, his voice barely audible. "Can't or won't," Nina pressed. "Sir, with respect, a man's life is being destroyed to cover up corruption. That goes against everything the court should stand for." Williams finally looked up, his eyes haunted. "You don't understand the position I'm in." "I think I do," Nina said softly. "Your son's drug charges, the sudden case dismissal, Officer Griggs's involvement." The judge's face paled. "You've been investigating me." "I've been investigating everyone," Nina corrected him. She placed two more items on his desk, the metal nomination file showing Isaiah's distinguished service, and a still image from the body cam footage showing Griggs planting evidence. "The question is," Nina continued, "when this all comes to light, and it will, which side of history do you want to be on?" Judge Williams stared at the documents for a long time, saying nothing. Finally, he looked up. "The trial proceeds as scheduled. I'll make my decisions based on the evidence presented in court." It wasn't the commitment Nina had hoped for, but something in the judge's tone gave her a flicker of hope. That night, Nina returned to her apartment to find the door slightly ajar. Her heart raced as she pushed it open cautiously. Inside, chaos greeted her, furniture overturned, papers scattered across the floor. Her evidence wall, where she had meticulously assembled the connections in Isaiah's case, had been torn down, the photos and documents missing. But Nina allowed herself a small, grim smile. She had anticipated this. Every document had been scanned, every photo digitized, every connection backed up to secure cloud storage. They had taken her physical evidence, but the truth remained intact. In his cell, Isaiah sat on the edge of his thin mattress, writing by the dim light filtering through the small window. The paper was cheap, the pencil stubby, but his handwriting remained precise, military neat. Dear Aaliyah, if you're reading this, things may have gone wrong. There are people who want to silence me because of what I know, what I've seen. But the truth deserves to be told, even if I'm not the one to tell it. I never abandoned you. I fought to find you every day for 16 years. The system that took you from me is the same one that's trying to bury me now. Whatever happens in that courtroom, know that I am proud of the woman you've become. Your mother would be too. Keep fighting. The truth always finds its way to the light, even if it takes time. With all my love. Your father, Isaiah, folded the letter carefully, tucking it into his boot where the guards rarely checked. Then he knelt beside his bed, hands clasped in front of him. For the fallen, he whispered into the darkness. For the silenced, for the truth. Tomorrow the trial would begin. The morning of the trial broke with unexpected clarity, the sky a perfect blue after days of rain. Outside the courthouse, protesters lined the steps, holding signs demanding justice for Isaiah and accountability for police misconduct. News vans crowded the street, reporters jostling for the best position to capture the day's proceedings. Inside, the atmosphere was tense, charged with anticipation. Nina walked through the security checkpoint, her case files clutched to her chest, like armor. Her supervisor had finally signed off on her motion, though his signature came with a warning. You're on your own if this goes south. The courtroom filled quickly. On one side, uniformed officers including Griggs sat in silent solidarity, their presence an unsubtle message to the jury and judge. On the other, veterans from across the state had answered the call to support one of their own, filling the benches with a sea of military caps and solemn faces. Isaiah was led in through a side door, wearing a suit Aaliyah had purchased for him, his first proper clothing in years. The transformation was striking. Though still thin, he carried himself with military bearing, his head high, his gaze direct. The guards removed his handcuffs, and he took his seat beside Nina, nodding once to Aaliyah in the front row. Judge Williams entered, his face a careful mask of judicial impartiality. Court is now in session, he announced, his voice steadier than it had been the day before. The state versus Isaiah Boone. Are both parties ready to proceed? District Attorney Peterson stood. The state is ready, Your Honor. The defense is ready, Nina replied, her voice clear and confident despite the flutter of nerves in her stomach. Judge Williams looked out at the packed courtroom. Given the public interest in this case, I want to remind everyone that I will tolerate no disruptions or attempts to influence these proceedings. Now we'll begin with jury selection. As potential jurors were questioned, Nina quickly recognized two faces from a previous corruption-related case. Both had ruled in favor of the police despite overwhelming evidence. She used her limited challenges to remove them, noting the flash of annoyance on Griggs's face each time. Peterson approached jury selection like a man selecting weapons, focusing on individuals who expressed strong law and order views or had family in law enforcement. He leaned repeatedly toward Griggs, who whispered instructions throughout the process. Once the jury was seated, 7 women and 5 men, a mix of ages and backgrounds, opening statements began. Peterson painted Isaiah as a dangerous vagrant, with mental instability, who had threatened public safety. He promised evidence of Isaiah's violent tendencies and resistance to lawful police commands. When Nina's turn came, she stood slowly, making eye contact with each juror before speaking. "This case isn't just about a homeless man wrongfully arrested," she began, her voice gathering strength. "It's about Isaiah Boone, a decorated war hero who served this country with distinction for 15 years. A man who was discarded by the very system he risked his life to protect," she gestured to Isaiah. "The evidence will show that my client was not only innocent of the charges brought against him, but was deliberately targeted by officers who planted evidence and falsified reports. Officers who have done this before to other vulnerable citizens," Nina continued. "But this case goes beyond police misconduct. It reveals a pattern of systemic silencing, a veteran who spoke truth to power and was erased for his courage. By the end of this trial, you won't just know Isaiah Boone is innocent. You'll understand why it was so important to certain people that he be silenced." The prosecution's first witness was Tom Brady, the store clerk. Under Peterson's careful questioning, he recounted a version of events that portrayed Isaiah as aggressive and threatening. "He tried to get behind the counter when I told him he didn't have enough money," Brady claimed, wiping sweat from his forehead despite the courtroom's air conditioning. "Said he'd come back and deal with me." When Nina cross-examined Brady, she pulled up store surveillance footage that Elijah had obtained from a neighboring business. The grainy video clearly showed Isaiah simply standing at the counter, then outside on the bench, making no aggressive moves. "Mr. Brady, this footage shows my client never attempted to go behind the counter, never made any threatening gestures. Would you like to revise your testimony?" Brady's eyes darted to Griggs, then back to Nina. "I might have remembered it wrong. It happened fast." "Remember, you're under oath," Nina reminded him gently. "Were you pressured to give a false statement about Mr. Boone?" "Objection," Peterson called. "Counsel is leading the witness. I'll rephrase," Nina said smoothly. "Mr. Brady, why did your description of events change so dramatically between today and your written statement?" Brady's facade crumbled. "Look, I was having a bad day. Maybe I overreacted. That's all I'm saying." As Brady stepped down, the jury's skepticism was palpable. The prosecution's case had suffered its first crack. Next, Peterson called officers Malloy and Turner, both of whom testified to Isaiah's aggressive resistance during arrest. Nina's cross-examination was surgical, pointing out contradictions between their testimony and the arrest report, as well as physical impossibilities in their timeline. During the lunch recess, Nina received an urgent call from Bay City General Hospital. A nurse had been trying to reach her regarding Officer Bell. Within the hour, Nina had filed an emergency motion to amend her witness list, citing Bell's critical condition and new evidence. When court reconvened, Nina called James Bell to the stand. A murmur ran through the courtroom as Bell was wheeled in, his face bruised beyond recognition, an IV stand accompanying his wheelchair. Griggs shifted uncomfortably in his seat, exchanging glances with Malloy. "Officer Bell," Nina began gently, "can you tell the court what happened to you?" "Objection." Peterson was on his feet. "This witness's injuries are irrelevant to the charges against the defendant." "Your Honor," Nina countered, "Officer Bell's testimony directly relates to evidence tampering in this case, and his assault is directly connected to his decision to come forward." Judge Williams considered for a moment. "I'll allow it. The witness may answer." Bell's voice was weak but determined. "I was attacked outside my apartment last night. They took nothing. Not my wallet, not my watch. Just beat me and left a message. Next time it would be my brother." "And why do you believe you were attacked?" Nina asked. "Because I had evidence," Bell replied, his swollen eyes fixed on Griggs. "Body cam footage that shows officers Griggs and Malloy planting evidence in Mr. Boone's backpack." The courtroom erupted. Judge Williams banged his gavel repeatedly. "Order! I will have order!" When the room quieted, Nina played the footage Bell had provided. The video was damning. Griggs clearly placing the switchblade in Isaiah's bag while Malloy watched. Their conversation was equally incriminating. "Make sure it has prints. Nobody's gonna miss another homeless vet." Let's bury him like the rest. Griggs's face contorted with rage from the gallery. Malloy stared at his hands. All color drained from his face. Bell's testimony continued, detailing the pattern of abuse he had witnessed within the department, the threats against his undocumented brother, and the pressure to maintain the blue wall of silence. Throughout his testimony, he never flinched, never broke eye contact with the jury, despite Griggs's intimidating stare from across the room. By the time Bell was wheeled out, the atmosphere in the courtroom had shifted dramatically. The prosecution's case was unraveling, and Peterson knew it. He requested a brief recess, which the judge granted. During the break, Judge Williams retreated to his chambers, visibly shaken by Bell's testimony. The evidence of police corruption was overwhelming, and the public attention made it impossible to dismiss. When court reconvened, Nina announced her intention to call Isaiah Boone to the stand. A hush fell over the courtroom as Isaiah walked forward, placed his hand on the Bible, and took the oath. Under Nina's careful questioning, Isaiah told his story with quiet dignity. His years of service, the classified operations, the moral stand that cost him everything, the loss of his wife and daughter, and his descent into homelessness. "I never threatened anyone at that store," Isaiah stated firmly. "I had enough for water. When he refused, I said I'd go elsewhere, that's all." The jury listened with rapt attention, many visibly moved by Isaiah's account of his fall from decorated soldier to homeless veteran. Even some of the officers in attendance shifted uncomfortably, particularly the younger ones who had never heard the full story. When Peterson began his cross-examination, his approach was aggressive, attempting to paint Isaiah as delusional, inventing conspiracy theories to explain his circumstances. "So you expect this court to believe that the United States military erased your entire service record because you, what, saw something you shouldn't have?" Peterson's tone was dismissive. "No, sir," Isaiah replied calmly. "They erased my record because I refused to erase the truth." Peterson switched tactics, focusing on Isaiah's PTSD and alcoholism during his early years of homelessness. "Isn't it possible that your memory of these events is compromised by your condition? That you've constructed this elaborate story to make sense of your circumstances?" Isaiah considered the question thoughtfully. "Memory is a funny thing, Mr. Peterson. I can't always remember what I ate yesterday, but some moments, the ones that change your life, those burn into you like brands. I remember every word of the order I refused to follow. I remember the face of every civilian we saved instead of abandoned. And I remember the exact smell of the rain the day they told me my wife was dead." His simple sincerity resonated through the courtroom. Peterson had no further questions. As Isaiah returned to his seat, Judge Williams leaned forward slightly. "Sergeant Boone," he said, his voice unusually quiet. "Is that your official name and rank?" Isaiah looked up, surprised at the question. "Yes, Your Honor. Staff Sergeant Isaiah Boone, 1st Recon Special Joint Task Command." The judge nodded slowly, then abruptly announced, "The court will take a 15-minute recess." He stood and retreated to his chambers without further explanation. When Judge Williams returned, something had changed in his demeanor. He seemed more confident, more resolved than he had been since the trial began. He adjusted his robes, then looked directly at Isaiah. "Before we proceed," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the now silent courtroom, "I need to address something of personal significance." He paused, seeming to gather himself. "This man," he gestured to Isaiah, "served our country with distinction. I know this because I was a young JAG officer assigned to review operations in that region in '07. I remember the name Boone. I remember the reports of his unit's actions." The judge's voice strengthened with each word. "I remember. A soldier who chose to save lives when it would have been easier to follow orders and leave them behind." Then, in a moment that would later be described in newspapers across the country, Judge Williams stood and addressed the entire courtroom. "This man before us deserves our respect, not our condemnation. Everyone, please rise." The courtroom fell silent, then as one body, everyone stood. Cameras flashed despite the prohibition on photography. The jurors rose instinctively, their faces showing varying degrees of shock and dawning understanding. Even the bailiff and court reporter stood, caught in the moment's gravity. Isaiah looked around, overwhelmed by the gesture. For the first time since his arrest, tears fell freely down his weathered face, washing away years of invisibility in their wake. The courtroom remained standing in complete silence. Cameras continued to flash despite court regulations, capturing the historic moment when Judge Franklin Williams publicly acknowledged Isaiah Boone's service and sacrifice. Isaiah stood tall but stunned, tears tracking silently down his weathered face as decades of invisibility melted away in a single, powerful gesture of respect. Griggs was the only person who refused to stand, his face contorted with rage. He pushed his chair back with a screech against the polished floor and stormed toward the exit. "Officer Griggs," Judge Williams called sharply, "this court has not adjourned. Return to your seat immediately." Griggs hesitated at the door, his body rigid with fury, before slowly making his way back to his place in the gallery. The tension in the room was palpable. "Court will recess until tomorrow morning at 9, Judge Williams announced, bringing down his gavel with a decisive crack. "Counsel, I want to see both of you in my chambers, now." As the courtroom began to empty, Griggs leaned toward District Attorney Peterson, his voice low but intense. "This isn't over, and I won't go down alone." Peterson edged away slightly, his expression uneasy. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the courtroom's air conditioning. The threat in Griggs' words was unmistakable. In the judge's chambers, Williams had removed his robes and sat behind his desk, looking both exhausted and somehow lighter than he had in days. "What I did out there was unorthodox," he acknowledged, "but necessary." Nina nodded. "Thank you for your honesty, Your Honor." "Don't thank me yet," Williams replied grimly. "What happens next will be difficult for everyone." He turned to Peterson. "Bill, you need to consider the ethical implications of continuing this prosecution, given the evidence that's been presented." Peterson loosened his tie, looking trapped. "Franklin, you know the pressures I'm under. The department, the mayor's office." "The law should be your only pressure," Williams cut in. "And the evidence clearly shows that these officers falsified reports and planted evidence." "I need to consult with my office," Peterson said, rising quickly. "I'll have a decision by morning." After Peterson left, Williams turned to Nina. "Ms. Clay, I want to be clear about something. What I did today wasn't just about Sergeant Boone. It was about making amends for my own silence." He opened a drawer and removed a manila folder, sliding it across the desk. "This contains my resignation letter. I'll submit it after this trial concludes." "Sir, that may not be necessary," Nina began. "It is," Williams interrupted firmly. "I compromised my position once. I won't continue to sit on this bench having failed my oath." He managed a small smile. "But first, I intend to ensure this case receives the justice it deserves." Outside the courthouse, protesters had doubled in number, their chants echoing down the stone steps. As news of the judge's dramatic gesture spread, media crews from national networks began to arrive, setting up equipment on the courthouse lawn. Elijah moved through the crowd, recording interviews for his follow-up article. Veterans of all ages shared their stories of post-service neglect and police harassment, a pattern that extended far beyond Isaiah's case. Nina and Isaiah exited the building to thunderous applause. Isaiah paused at the top of the steps, momentarily. Overwhelmed by the support, Aaliyah appeared at his side, gently taking his arm. "They're here for you, Dad," she said softly. Isaiah straightened his shoulders and continued down the steps, acknowledging the crowd with a dignified nod. That evening, in a secluded office across town, Officer Griggs paced frantically, his phone pressed to his ear. "They're going to crucify us," he hissed. "The body cam footage, the judge's statement, we need to contain this." The voice on the other end was calm, measured. "Unfortunate but manageable. Deny everything. Question the footage's authenticity. We'll handle damage control at our end." "And what about Bell?" Griggs demanded. "He's still alive, still talking." Focus on saving yourself, Sergeant, the voice replied coldly. Cut your losses. Turner is already at the station turning himself. In what? Griggs stopped pacing. That's spineless. He's offering information in exchange for leniency. I suggest you consider your options carefully. The line went dead. Griggs stared at his phone in disbelief, then grabbed his keys and headed for the door. He needed to get out of town, at least until things cooled down. But as he reached his car, 2 unmarked vehicles pulled up, blocking his path. 4 men in dark suits stepped out, badges glinting in the streetlight. Peter Griggs, the lead agent, approached. FBI, we'd like you to come with us. On what charges? Griggs demanded, backing away. Obstruction of justice, conspiracy, evidence tampering, and civil rights violations, for starters. The agent's expression was impassive. Your partner, Officer Malloy, is already in custody. He's been quite helpful. As Griggs was led away in handcuffs, his world collapsed around him. The system he had manipulated for years had finally turned against him. Back at her apartment, Nina received an unexpected phone call. The voice on the other end was unfamiliar, professional. Ms. Clay, this is Special Agent Marcus Daniels. I understand you're representing Isaiah Boone. Nina felt a chill run down her spine. I am. What's this regarding? I'm with an interagency task force, Daniels said carefully. We've been monitoring your case with great interest. Officer, Griggs has been taken into federal custody. We believe his corruption extends beyond local police misconduct. Connected to Isaiah's military past? Nina guessed. A pause. I can't confirm that over an unsecured line, but we'd like to speak with you and your client. Tomorrow, if possible. I'll need more information before I agree to that, Nina replied, firmly. Check your email in 5 minutes, Daniel said. And Ms. Clay, you've done good work here. But this goes deeper than you know. After hanging up, Nina's computer pinged with an incoming message. The email contained minimal text, just a meeting time and location, but the attachment made her breath catch. It was a declassified document confirming Isaiah's participation in Operation Night Wind, along with a formal acknowledgement that his dishonorable discharge was under review. Meanwhile, at the police station, internal affairs officers had arrived, en masse, seizing computers and files related to Griggs's cases. Officer Turner sat in an interview room, looking shell-shocked as he detailed years of misconduct. It started small, he explained, voice barely above a whisper. Looking the other way when Griggs would rough up suspects. Then it was planting evidence on people who deserved it. Before I knew it, we were targeting specific people, mostly homeless, mostly minorities, always vulnerable. And Sergeant Boone? The IA investigator prompted. Turner shook his head. That was different. Griggs got a call about him. Said he was a priority target. Said there'd be a bonus in it for all of us if Boone got put away permanently. A call from whom? I don't know. But after that call, Griggs was obsessed with Boone, like he had something to prove. Early the next morning, the mayor called an emergency press conference, announcing an immediate investigation into the police department. Standing awkwardly behind him was Chief Robert Andrews, his usual confidence notably absent. These allegations of misconduct are deeply troubling, the mayor declared, careful to put distance between himself and the scandal. I've directed the state attorney's office to conduct a thorough review of all cases handled by the officers in question. What he didn't mention was the emergency city council meeting scheduled for that afternoon to discuss his own connections to Chief Andrews and their shared history of looking the other way. Back in the courtroom, the atmosphere was electric as proceedings resumed. The gallery was packed beyond capacity, with journalists lining the walls. Judge Williams entered, his expression solemn, but resolved. Before we continue, he began, I understand the prosecution has an announcement. Peterson stood, his shoulders slumped in defeat. Your Honor, in light of the evidence presented yesterday and after consultation with the state attorney's office, the prosecution moves to dismiss all charges against Isaiah Boone. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Judge Williams nodded, Motion granted. But before he could continue, the courtroom doors opened, and a distinguished older man in a crisp military uniform entered. The medals on his chest caught the light as he made his way to the front. "Your Honor," he said in a commanding voice, "I am General James Harrington, retired. I've come to testify on behalf of Staff Sergeant Isaiah Boone." Judge Williams raised an eyebrow. "The charges have been dismissed, General." "I'm aware," Harrington replied, "but the record needs to be set straight, not just in this court, but in the court of public opinion." Williams considered for a moment, then nodded. "Proceed." General Harrington turned to face the courtroom, his back ramrod straight despite his 70 years. "I commanded the Special Joint Task Command from 2002 to 2010. Staff Sergeant Boone served under my command for multiple, high-risk operations." He paused, his eyes finding Isaiah in the gallery. "He was one of the finest soldiers I ever had the privilege to lead." The general detailed Isaiah's exemplary service record, the lives he had saved, and the impossible choices he had faced. Then, his voice dropping slightly, he addressed the heart of the matter. What happened to Sergeant Boone after Operation Night Wind was a travesty of justice. He should have been protected, not punished. He upheld the highest ideals of our military, oath when others did not. Harrington's gaze swept the room. "I failed him then. We all did. I'm here to make that right." Emotion rippled through the courtroom. Veterans in attendance sat straighter, many with tears in their eyes. Isaiah remained still, his expression a complex mixture of vindication and old pain. Judge Williams let the moment settle before speaking. "Thank you, General. Your testimony will be entered into the record." He turned to Isaiah. "Mr. Boone, please, approach the bench." Isaiah walked forward, standing tall before the judge who had once been a young JAG officer reviewing his unit's actions. "Mr. Boone," Williams began formally, "this court finds you not guilty on all charges. Furthermore, I am ordering an immediate investigation into the conduct of all officers involved in your arrest and prosecution." He paused, then added more personally, "On behalf of this court, and speaking as a former military officer myself, I extend my deepest apologies for the injustices you have suffered." The gavel came down with finality. Isaiah Boone was free. Outside on the courthouse steps, Nina, Isaiah, Aaliyah, and Elijah emerged into the bright midday sun to thunderous applause from the waiting crowd. Isaiah, overwhelmed by the moment, raised his hand in a solemn salute that was immediately returned by every veteran present. That night, as the city processed the day's revelations, Isaiah slipped away from the celebrations to visit the war memorial downtown. In the quiet darkness, he stood before the wall of names, his fingers tracing the engraved letters of his fallen teammates. "I told them I'd speak for you," he whispered to their memory. "Now they'll never forget." The weeks following Isaiah's exoneration brought a whirlwind of changes. Media outlets clamored for exclusive interviews, and publishers offered substantial deals for his life story. Isaiah declined them all with quiet dignity. "I don't want fame or fortune," he told Nina during a quiet dinner at her apartment. "I just want my dignity back, and my daughter's respect." "You have both," Nina assured him, glancing at Aaliyah, who was setting plates on the table. "And more." The investigation into the police department expanded rapidly. Internal Affairs released a comprehensive report documenting a decade of systematic corruption. 5 officers were suspended, and criminal charges were filed against Griggs and Malloy for evidence tampering, false imprisonment, and civil rights violations. Federal investigators took a deeper interest in the case, particularly the connection between Isaiah's military whistleblowing and his subsequent persecution. 2 mid-level Pentagon officials abruptly resigned, citing personal reasons that fooled no one. For Nina, the aftermath brought unexpected recognition. The National Legal Defense Association nominated her for the Brennan Award for Justice Advocacy, citing her extraordinary commitment to defending the vulnerable against systemic oppression. "I was just doing my job," she protested when Barker, her mentor, brought her the news. "No," he corrected her with a smile. "You were doing what everyone should do, but few have the courage to attempt." He handed her a formal envelope. "The board, wants to meet with you. They're interested in funding a new initiative. That initiative would become the Veterans Justice Foundation, dedicated to providing legal representation for former service members wrongfully targeted by the system. Nina would serve as its founding director, with Isaiah as a special advisor on veteran affairs. Elijah's articles on the case won national attention, culminating in a Pulitzer Prize for investigative journalism. At the award ceremony, he dedicated the honor to the invisible people our society has trained itself not to see. The prize money, combined with donations from supporters, funded the launch of Spotlight Journalism, a nonprofit dedicated to exposing police corruption and advocating for accountability in law enforcement. Meanwhile, Aaliyah and Isaiah began the delicate process of rebuilding their relationship. There were awkward silences and painful conversations, moments when 16 years of separation seemed an unbridgeable gulf. But there were also discoveries of shared traits: the same quiet laugh, the same methodical approach to problems, the same unwavering sense of justice. One crisp autumn morning, they visited Alicia's grave together. Isaiah stood back, allowing Aaliyah a private moment with her mother's memory. Then, with gentle reverence, she placed a framed photograph against the headstone. Isaiah in his uniform during his prime, strong and proud. "So she can see you the way she remembered you," Aaliyah explained, her voice thick with emotion. Isaiah nodded, unable to speak. They stood together in silence, father and daughter united in memory of the woman they had both lost. Officer James Bell received a medical retirement with full benefits, his whistleblower status protecting him from departmental retaliation. During his recovery, he became an advocate for police reform, working with Nina's foundation to develop ethics training programs for new officers. "Most cops want to do the right thing," he told a class of police academy cadets. "But the system often punishes those who stand up and rewards those who stay silent. We need to change that culture from the inside." The cadets listened attentively, struck by the still visible scars on Bell's face, badges of his moral courage. Judge Williams, true to his word, submitted his resignation after the trial concluded. The legal community was divided in its response. Some criticized his initial compromises, while others praised his eventual stand for justice. Williams himself seemed at peace with his decision. He began volunteering at a veterans support group, where Isaiah occasionally spoke about coping with PTSD and rebuilding life after service. During one session, Williams approached Isaiah hesitantly. "I'm not sure if I have the right to ask for forgiveness," he admitted. "We all make compromises we regret," Isaiah replied without judgment. "The question is what we do afterwards." Nina continued to receive cases of homeless individuals targeted by remaining corrupt elements in the system. Two veterans with stories similar to Isaiah's sought her help, confirming her suspicion that his case was part of a broader pattern of injustice. "It's not just about a few bad cops," she explained to her growing team of volunteer attorneys. "It's about a system designed to protect power and property over people, especially those without voices." She pinned up a photo of Isaiah on their office wall. "One case at a time, we're going to change that system." Isaiah found temporary housing through a veterans program, though he spent most days helping at Aaliyah's apartment, fixing things around her place and cooking meals they would share in the evening. The routines of normal life felt strange after so many years on the streets, but he embraced them as gifts he'd never expected to receive. One particularly meaningful day came when Isaiah adopted a rescue dog from the city shelter, a medium-sized mixed breed with intelligent eyes and a missing back leg. He named him Bravo, after his old unit. Each morning, Isaiah and Bravo would walk past the corner where he had once slept. The city had installed a small bronze plaque there, part of a new initiative to recognize homeless veterans. The inscription read simply, "In honor of those who served their country but found no home upon return, we see you now." 6 months after the trial, Isaiah received an official letter from the Department of Defense. His hands trembled slightly as he opened it, Aaliyah at his side. Inside was formal notification that his dishonorable discharge had been overturned and replaced with honorable with distinction. Additionally, his Medal of Valor, denied 15 years earlier, had finally been approved. The accompanying note was handwritten. Sergeant Boone, no official apology can adequately address the injustices you suffered. Your steadfast adherence to your oath to support and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic, cost you dearly, but exemplified the highest ideals of military service. We failed you. For that, I am deeply sorry. With profound respect, General James Harrington Isaiah read the letter twice, then carefully set it aside. Doesn't change the past, he said quietly. But it matters for the future. Your future? Aaliyah asked. Isaiah smiled gently. Everyone's future. The truth matters even when it comes too late. 1 year to the day after his arrest, Isaiah stood before a group of at-risk teens at the community center, where he now worked as a mentor. The young people, mostly from neighborhoods where police encounters often ended badly, watched him with a mixture of wariness and curiosity. This uniform doesn't make you a hero, Isaiah told them, holding up his old military jacket that now hung loosely on his still thin frame. What you do after they take it off, that's what counts. He looked out at their young faces, seeing in them both vulnerability and strength. Society might tell you you're invisible, might try to convince you your voice doesn't matter. That's how systems of power stay in control, by making you believe you're powerless. Isaiah stood a little straighter, his voice gaining conviction. But here's the truth they don't want you to know. You matter. Your story matters. And when you stand up and tell that story, even if your voice shakes, even if it takes years to be heard, you can change the world. As he spoke, Aaliyah watched from the doorway, pride shining in her eyes. Behind her stood Nina and Elijah, witnessing the transformation of a man who had nearly been erased from history, now helping write a new chapter for others. Outside, the sun shone on a city slowly awakening to its own failures and possibilities. Change wouldn't come easily or quickly. Systems of power and oppression had deep roots and fierce defenders. But in courtrooms and community centers, in policy meetings and public protests, the work continued. Isaiah's story had become more than one man's journey from invisibility to vindication. It had become a rallying cry, a case study, a blueprint for challenging injustice. The corruption that had nearly destroyed him hadn't been completely defeated. Such battles are never truly won. But it had been exposed, confronted, and held accountable. And in a world where victories are often incomplete and justice imperfect, that counted for something important. That counted for hope. Who among us walks past the invisible, never questioning what forces conspired to erase their story? If this tale of justice long denied moved you, hit like, subscribe, and share to ensure more untold stories finally get the audience they deserve.